Here are the answers to 12 questions that buyers of real estate ask about working with real estate agents. I want to buy real estate. What do I need to know about working with real estate brokers? When buying real estate, you may have several choices as to how you want a real estate firm and its affiliated brokers to work with you. For example, you may want them to represent only you, as a buyer agent. You may be willing for them to represent both you and the seller at the same time, as a dual agent. Or you may want no representation, and let them represent only the seller, as a seller's agent or subagent. Some brokers will offer you a choice of these services. Others may not. What are a buyer agent's duties to a buyer? If the real estate firm and its affiliated brokers represent you, they must promote your best interests, be loyal to you, follow your lawful instructions, provide you with all material facts that could influence your decisions, use reasonable skill, care and diligence, and account for all monies they handle for you. Once you have agreed, either orally or in writing, for the firm and its affiliated brokers to be your buyer agent, they may not give any confidential information about you to sellers or their agents during the agency relationship without your permission. But until you make this agreement with your buyer agent, you should avoid telling the broker anything you would not want a seller to know. Must a buyer have a written agency agreement with the agent who represents the buyer? To make sure that you and the real estate firm have a clear understanding of what your relationship will be and what the firm will do for you, you may want to have a written agreement when you first begin working with a broker. However, some firms may be willing to represent and assist you initially as a buyer agent without a written agreement. But if you decide to make an offer to purchase a particular property, the broker must enter into a written agency agreement with you before making a written or oral offer. If you do not sign the agency agreement, then the broker can no longer represent and assist you and is no longer required to keep information about you confidential. What services might a buyer agent provide? Whether you have a written or unwritten agreement, a buyer agent can perform a number of services for you. These may include helping you find a suitable property, arrange financing, learn more about the property, and otherwise promote your best interests. If you have a written agency agreement, the agent can also help you prepare and submit a written offer to the seller. How is a buyer agent compensated? A buyer agent can be compensated in different ways. For example, you can pay the agent out of your own pocket, or the agent may seek compensation from the seller or listing firm first, but require you to pay if the seller or listing firm refuses, or only agrees to pay a portion of the buyer agent's fee. Whatever the case, be sure your compensation arrangement with your buyer agent is clearly indicated in a buyer agency agreement and that you carefully read and understand the compensation provision before you make an offer to purchase property. What happens if I want to buy a property listed by the same agent or firm that represents me? You may permit a broker or firm to represent you and the seller at the same time. This would mean that the real estate firm and all of its affiliated brokers would represent you and the seller equally. This dual agency relationship will happen if you become interested in buying a property listed with your agent's firm. If you have not already agreed to a dual agency relationship in your written or oral buyer agency agreement, and this is acceptable to you, then your buyer agent will ask you to amend the buyer agency agreement, or sign a separate agreement or document permitting his or her firm to act as agent for both you and the seller. Any agreement between you and an agent that permits dual agency must be put in writing, no later than the time you make an offer to purchase. Both the seller and you, as buyer, must consent in writing to dual agency. What is the risk if I agree to dual agency? Dual agency creates a potential conflict of interest for the firm that represents you, since its loyalty is divided between you and the seller. It is especially important that you have a clear understanding of what your relationship is with the firm and all of its individual affiliated brokers, since all of them are dual agents. This can best be accomplished by putting the agreement in writing at the earliest possible time and asking any questions that you may have. A dual agent must treat buyers and sellers fairly and equally, and cannot help one party gain an advantage over the other party. Although each dual agent owes both their clients the same duties, buyers and sellers can prohibit dual agents from divulging certain confidential information about them to the other party. How can I reduce the risk if dual agency occurs? To minimize conflicts of interest, some firms also offer a form of dual agency called designated dual agency, where one broker in the firm represents only the seller, and another broker represents only the buyer. The firm and the firm's other affiliated brokers remain in dual agency. This option, when offered by a firm, may allow each designated agent to more fully represent each party. Under designated dual agency, each agent designated to represent the buyer is prohibited from disclosing 1. That the buyer may agree to any price or terms other than those established by the buyer, 2. The buyer's motivation for buying, and 3. Any information the buyer has identified as confidential, unless otherwise required by statute or rule. For more details about dual agency, watch the video. Understanding agency options. What happens if the buyer-agency agreement expires? If the buyer-agency agreement expires after you entered into a contract to purchase a property, then your agent may continue to represent you through the date of the closing, and you may be responsible for compensating the firm in accordance with the provisions of the buyer-agency agreement. If you are not under contract to buy a property when your buyer-agency agreement expires, then your agent must immediately stop representing you, unless you first enter into a new buyer-agency agreement with the agent. Can I buy real estate without hiring a real estate broker? Yes. If the real estate broker or firm that you contact does not offer buyer agency, or you do not want them to act as your buyer agent, you can still work with the firm and its affiliated brokers. However, they will be acting as the seller's agent or sub-agent. The broker can still help you find and purchase property and provide many of the same services as a buyer's agent. The broker must be fair with you and report any material facts, defects such as a leaky roof, about properties. But remember, the broker represents the seller, not you, and therefore must try to obtain for the seller the best possible price and terms for the seller's property, and cannot give you advice on buying the property if it will conflict with the seller's interests. Furthermore, a seller's agent is required to give the seller any information about you, even personal, financial, or confidential information, that would help the seller in the sale of their property. Brokers must tell you in writing if they are seller's agents before they ask you about anything that can help the seller. But until you are sure that a broker represents you and is not a seller's agent, you should avoid saying anything you do not want a seller to know. If I am an unrepresented buyer, who pays the real estate broker? Unless you agree otherwise, seller's agents are compensated by the sellers. Can the real estate agent who represents the seller require me to hire an agent to represent me? No. While it may benefit you to hire an agent, there is no law requiring a buyer to hire a real estate agent to buy real estate.